The clock on the bedside table glowed 2:47 a.m., its faint light carving small shadows across the quiet hotel room. Outside, the city slept under a thin rain that whispered against the windows, as if even the weather knew how fragile the night had become. Inside, she sat alone, a woman in her late 50s, posture straight yet weary, the kind of strength that looks calm only because it has no other choice. A stack of papers lay spread before her on the small round table: contracts, beneficiary forms, an unsigned letter. Each page seemed to hum with unfinished business, their corners curling slightly in the hotel's dry air. Her name was Evelyn, though in this room names mattered less than the silence between thoughts. She touched the edge of one page with slow precision, the way a surgeon might trace a scar. Her eyes moved from the ink to the window, where city lights blurred into the night's reflection. It was not the kind of night one planned to remember, but one that would live in memory anyway. A phone sat beside her teacup, silent, face down. She had turned off the sound an hour ago, not because she feared a call, but because she didn't want to hope for one. There was a difference, and she had learned it the hard way. The room smelled faintly of paper, lemon polish, and loneliness. The television remote rested untouched on the dresser, next to an untouched glass of water. She preferred the company of thoughts to the noise of strangers' laughter echoing through hotel channels. On the table, the letter waited. Its first line read, "For when the silence becomes heavier than truth." She hadn't finished writing it. Maybe she didn't know how to. Maybe she feared what it would sound like once finished, an ending she wasn't ready to name. She leaned back in her chair, running her fingers over the rim of the teacup. The ceramic had cooled, but its warmth still lingered faintly, like a promise that once meant something. Her reflection in the window looked older than she remembered, softer in some places, sharper in others. The face of a woman who had carried both love and betrayal, and survived both without applause. For years, she'd believed forgiveness was a bridge built from two sides. Tonight, she realized she'd been building alone. Her daughter, Clara, hadn't crossed. Not yet. Maybe she never would. The thought didn't sting the way it used to. It only settled deeper, like a truth you stop trying to change. Evelyn picked up her pen. It was heavy, an expensive one her husband once gifted her before he passed. The weight of it reminded her that signatures have power, not only to transfer assets or close accounts, but to draw the invisible line between past and peace. She signed the first form, the tip of the pen gliding slowly. Each letter was deliberate, almost ceremonial. When she finished, she exhaled. Not relief, exactly, but release. One signature closer to freedom, one document further from the chaos that family could sometimes become. The clock ticked again. She glanced at it without moving her head. Time, it seemed, had learned to pass quietly in her presence. Somewhere beyond the window, sirens faded, and a new kind of silence took their place. Thick, heavy, the kind that audiences mistake for calm after a performance ends. But Evelyn knew better. This wasn't quiet. It was the pause before a storm remembered its next word. She turned the phone over once, looked at the blank screen, and placed it face down again. Then she whispered to the empty room, barely above breath, "Let tomorrow come. I'm ready for it now." The morning had barely found its voice when the knock came, soft at first, then again, sharper, closer, as if the sound itself carried intention. Evelyn froze halfway through buttoning her coat. For a moment, she thought it might be housekeeping or a courier at the wrong door. But something about the rhythm of that third knock, hesitant but familiar, made her heart shift in her chest. Silence stretched out, wide and waiting. Even the city outside seemed to pause. The hum of distant engines dulled. The clatter of footsteps faded. The air in the room grew still enough to hear her own pulse. She walked slowly toward the door, her hand hovering inches from the knob. Years of memory pressed behind that thin slab of wood. Every argument, every letter never sent, every silence that had built walls where bridges should have been. Evelyn leaned forward and looked through the peephole. There she was, Clara. Her daughter stood in the narrow hallway, framed by the dull light of morning, eyes tired, hair loosely tied back, holding a folder to her chest like a fragile shield. She looked older than Evelyn remembered, but also smaller somehow, like time had taken pieces of her that she was now trying to return. For a heartbeat, Evelyn didn't move. The old reflex, the one that said, "Don't open it yet, not until you're ready," whispered in her mind, but readiness was a luxury she had already spent. She unlatched the door. The click was soft but final, like a seal breaking. Evelyn opened the door halfway. The scent of rain drifted in from the hallway, mingling with the dry paper smell of her room. "Mom," Clara said, voice low, unsure. "Please, we have to talk. Off the record." The words hung between them, thin but heavy. Off the record. That phrase belonged to another world, one of lawyers, signatures, and negotiations. But Clara didn't say it like a lawyer. She said it like a daughter trying to reach through the ash of what used to be a family. Evelyn's eyes softened, but her hand stayed on the doorknob. "You should be at work," she said quietly. "I couldn't," Clara replied. "Not after yesterday." Evelyn studied her, the faint tremor in her hands, the exhaustion in her eyes that looked too much like her own. Time had sculpted them both into versions neither had planned to meet. Finally, she stepped aside. "Come in," she said. Clara entered slowly, as if afraid the floor might give way. The room, still half shadowed by morning, felt suddenly smaller. 2 generations of silence pressed into one shared space. Evelyn closed the door behind her. For a long moment, neither spoke. The ticking clock on the nightstand filled the room like background dialogue in a film. Clara broke first. "You sent the letter?" she said. "I read it." Evelyn nodded once. "Then you know why I did what I did." "I know what you think you did," Clara whispered, "but you left me out of it, Mom. You always do." There it was, the quiet ache that never learned how to heal. Evelyn wanted to answer, but the right words hid behind too many wrong ones. "I didn't want to fight," she said finally. "Not anymore." "Then don't," Clara said. "Just listen." Her voice cracked on that last word, soft but trembling, the kind of sound that makes even walls lean closer. Evelyn felt something break quietly inside her, not like glass, but like ice, slow, inevitable, a thaw that comes too late for flowers, but just in time for forgiveness. Neither moved for a while. The morning light crept across the carpet, reaching their feet first, then their faces, as if the day itself was asking them to begin again. The hallway smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and last night's rain. A thin strip of morning light slid beneath the hotel door, tracing the line between mother and daughter. Clara stood outside, one hand pressed against the cold surface, the other clutching the folder she'd carried since dawn. Her knuckles were white, but her expression was set, half defiant, half desperate. Inside, Evelyn sat on the edge of her chair, perfectly still, eyes fixed on the door as though it could blink first. "Mom," Clara called softly, "please, just open the door." There was a pause. The quiet hum of the hallway camera overhead filled the silence with its soft, mechanical breath. Then Evelyn's voice came, calm but edged. "Say it through the door." Clara frowned. "Really? You want this recorded?" She glanced up at the small red light above the doorframe. It blinked, steady, watching. "Let it," Evelyn said. "Maybe truth needs witnesses." The words landed like a gavel. Clara exhaled, a sharp sigh of frustration. "You're making it bigger than it was." "It was big," Evelyn replied. Her voice was low, even, but there was steel under it. "It was big the moment you betrayed the trust that built this family." Clara's throat tightened. "You're twisting it." "No," Evelyn interrupted, still calm. "I'm straightening it." Clara's jaw clenched. For a long moment she stared at the door, not the wood, but the woman behind it, the one who had taught her that truth was like glass. You can see through it, but you can also cut yourself on it if you're careless. "Mom," she said again, softer now, "you'll ruin everything if you go public." Inside, Evelyn closed her eyes. The words echoed, You'll ruin everything. The same phrase her late husband once used when she told him the truth about his business partner. The same phrase that always meant, keep quiet, stay safe, pretend it didn't happen. No, Clara, she said finally, her voice steady. You ruined it when you chose silence over truth. The air between them seemed to hum, like two wires too close to sparking. Clara swallowed hard. I didn't choose silence. I chose survival. Evelyn stood now, moving closer to the door, her shadow lengthening across the floor. Survival at whose expense? Mine? The family's? You think betrayal is cheaper if you pay for it with excuses? Clara flinched. You don't understand. I understand exactly. Evelyn cut in. You thought loyalty meant protecting the secret, not the people. A tear slipped down Clara's cheek, quick and uninvited. I was trying to keep us from falling apart. Evelyn leaned her forehead gently against the door. And in doing that, you broke what was still whole. For a moment, neither spoke. The camera's red light flickered again, recording silence that felt heavier than any confession. Finally, Clara's voice trembled. So that's it? You're just going to let the world see me as the villain? Evelyn breathed in slowly, her hand resting flat against the wood. The world will see facts, Clara. What they make of them is theirs. What you do next, that's yours. The folder in Clara's hand loosened, papers shifting inside. She thought about dropping it, about walking away, about every I'm sorry that now felt too late. Inside, Evelyn stepped back from the door, her voice barely above a whisper now. You can still choose truth. It's smaller than pride, but it lasts longer. Clara pressed her palm to the door again, wishing the distance were measured in inches, not years. I don't know if I can, she said. You already did, Evelyn replied quietly. You came here. The hallway stayed silent after that. The red light blinked once more, then went out, the camera finally reaching its memory limit. Inside and outside, two women breathed at the same time, on opposite sides of the same truth. The air in the small conference room felt filtered, almost artificial, like it had been scrubbed clean of emotion before they walked in. The long table gleamed under the overhead light, reflecting 2 cups of untouched water, one in front of each woman. On one side, Clara sat with her back straight, a notebook open, pen poised, rehearsed lines crowding the edges of her mind. Across from her, Evelyn waited with quiet steadiness, her hands folded neatly, eyes sharp but unreadable. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Clara began. Her tone was practiced, almost professional, the kind of tone that sounded like a press statement instead of an apology. Mom, this doesn't have to get ugly, she said, flipping open her notebook as if to rely on the comfort of bullet points. We both know the situation escalated. The investors are nervous. The board doesn't like instability and… Evelyn lifted her hand, stopping her mid-sentence. Stop. The word was calm, not loud, but it landed with the finality of a door closing. Clara blinked, startled by how quickly her script fell apart. Instability? Evelyn repeated. You mean the truth? Clara hesitated. I mean, perception, she said carefully. Buyers don't like scenes. They want clean transitions, strong leadership, predictable narratives. You're complicating things. A faint smile crossed Evelyn's face, tired but sure. Integrity doesn't collapse markets, Clara. Lies do. The silence that followed was heavier than accusation. Clara tried to speak again, but the words tangled. She'd come armed with logic, strategy, talking points, but none of them seemed to fit against her mother's quiet conviction. I'm trying to fix this, she said finally. I came here to make things right. Evelyn tilted her head. You came here to protect yourself. That's not the same thing. The younger woman's face tightened. You think I wanted this? You think I meant to? To betray me? Evelyn cut in softly. No, I think you meant to survive it, but sometimes survival demands the wrong sacrifice. Clara's fingers trembled around her pen. Her lawyer said I shouldn't come alone, she murmured, her voice shrinking. Evelyn leaned back, eyes narrowing with something between pity and exhaustion. "Then you should have brought a mirror," she said. "A good lawyer would have told you to look in it first." The words hit harder than Clara expected. She looked down at her hands, at the tiny ink marks from nervous doodles, the same nervous habit she'd had since childhood. For a moment, she wasn't the confident executive trying to negotiate her way out of a scandal. She was just a daughter, one who'd taken the easy path too many times, mistaking silence for peace. "Mom," she said, almost pleading now, "I'm not the enemy." Evelyn sighed, the kind of sigh that comes after years of loving someone who keeps mistaking forgiveness for weakness. "You were never my enemy, Clara. But you keep fighting me, like I am." "I just want a chance to make it right," Clara said, her voice cracking. "You can't rewrite what's already true," Evelyn replied. "You can only decide what kind of person you'll be after the truth." Clara looked up then, eyes wet, pride fractured. "And if I try? If I really try this time?" Evelyn's expression softened, only slightly. "Then maybe one day you'll earn peace instead of demanding it." The clock on the wall ticked once, sharp and deliberate. Clara closed her notebook slowly, the pen falling silent beside it. There were no more rehearsed lines left, only the space between them, filled with the ache of what was finally honest. Outside, sunlight crept through the blinds, carving thin stripes of light across the table between them, dividing mother and daughter by inches, but not by truth. The corridor outside the conference room was dim, the kind of half-light that makes everything feel suspended. Not quite night, not yet morning. The air was still, heavy with things that had been said and the ones that never would be. Clara stepped out first, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each step sharper than the last. But by the time she reached the end of the hallway, her stride faltered. Her mother's words still echoed behind her like a pulse. "You can't rewrite what's already true." Clara stopped walking. Her breath came shallow. She pressed her hand against the cold wall, the strength she'd rehearsed for days now collapsing in silence. The polished marble caught her reflection, distant, blurred, as if even the building refused to recognize her. Slowly, she slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, knees drawn close, her once immaculate blazer creasing under her arms. She looked smaller now, not the woman who negotiated contracts worth millions, but the daughter who once hid behind her mother's chair during thunderstorms. She whispered into the emptiness, voice trembling, "What happens if I tell my version?" The words hung in the air, fragile and uncertain, part confession, part defense. For a moment there was no answer, just the low hum of fluorescent lights and the soft rhythm of her unsteady breathing. Then, from the doorway, came Evelyn's voice, calm, clear, and devastatingly steady. "Then I'll tell the truth," she said. Clara froze. She hadn't realized her mother had followed her out. Evelyn stood there, framed by the faint light spilling from the conference room, her face unreadable, equal parts pain and unyielding grace. "Evidence doesn't need to shout," she added quietly. "It just waits, and it speaks when the noise fades." Clara's eyes lifted, shimmering with unshed tears. The statement felt like both a warning and a mercy. "I never meant to hurt you," Clara said, her voice breaking like thin glass. "I know," Evelyn replied softly, "but meaning doesn't erase damage." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of memories, mistakes, and the invisible thread that still bound them together. Somewhere deep inside, that silence was a shared longing. For forgiveness, for understanding, maybe even for time to rewind just one choice. Finally, Evelyn stepped closer, her heels barely making a sound. She looked down at her daughter, the same girl who once carried her briefcase to work, who used to scribble her dreams in the margins of old notebooks. "Trials don't end lives, Clara," she said, her tone softening, though her words still cut like truth always does. "Choices do." Clara let out a shaky breath, tears spilling freely now. "Then I've already ended mine." Evelyn crouched down, her knees cracking faintly, age catching up in the quietest of ways. She reached out, hesitated for a heartbeat, then gently brushed a strand of hair from Clara's face. "Not yet," she whispered. "You still get to choose again." Clara looked up, truly looked, for the first time. The anger, the pride, the desperate need to defend herself all melted into something rawer, smaller, grief. She nodded weakly, as if acknowledging a truth she'd spent years avoiding. The hallway light flickered once, the hum deepening. Outside, a faint drizzle began to tap against the glass windows, like the world itself exhaling. Evelyn stood again, straightening her coat. "Come home when you're ready," she said, not to explain, just to start. Clara watched her mother walk away, her silhouette shrinking into the golden haze at the far end of the corridor. And then she sat there, back against the wall, eyes closed, letting the silence wrap around her like a verdict, or maybe, for the first time, like forgiveness. The silence of the corridor was finally broken by the sharp, deliberate click of heels echoing against marble. The rhythm was fast, urgent, purposeful, the sound of someone who'd just heard that things had gone wrong and was trying to fix them before they shattered completely. Layla appeared at the far end of the hallway, her dark hair pulled into a sleek twist, her eyes already scanning the scene. She saw Clara sitting on the cold floor, her blazer rumpled, mascara smudged like faint bruises beneath her eyes. For a heartbeat, Layla froze. The confident business partner was gone, replaced by someone fragile and unbearably human. "Clara," she said softly, her voice steady but her eyes worried. "We should go." Clara didn't answer at first. Her gaze was still on the polished tiles, her fingers tracing invisible lines as if she were rewriting the past one motion at a time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely more than a whisper. "She won't listen." Layla crouched beside her. "Then let her not listen. You don't need to keep breaking just because she can't bend." Before Clara could reply, the conference room door opened again with a slow, deliberate creak. Evelyn's voice, calm, commanding, and painfully composed, slipped into the hall. "You both should have stayed home," she said. Her tone wasn't cruel. It was weary, the kind of exhaustion that comes when disappointment has burned too long to stay angry. She stood in the doorway, her expression a mixture of sorrow and unyielding authority. Layla straightened, instinctively positioning herself between mother and daughter. "Mrs. Alcott," she began carefully, "please, we can fix this. The paperwork, the trust, everything. It can be restructured. You just need to give us time." Evelyn's eyes moved from Layla to Clara. "Paperwork is never the problem," she said quietly. "People are." Clara lifted her head at that, eyes rimmed red, but still defiant. "You think I wanted this? You think I set out to destroy what you built?" Evelyn sighed, the weight of years in the sound. "Intentions don't rebuild broken things, Clara. Work does. Humility does." She paused, her gaze hardening just enough to make both women still. "If you truly want to fix this, come back as people who want to fix themselves." The words landed like a sentence, not shouted, not cruelly spoken, but final in a way that made the walls feel smaller. Layla tried again, her voice softening into something that was half apology, half plea. "Mrs. Alcott, please. We're not your enemies. We just made a mistake." Evelyn's expression didn't change. "Then prove it," she said. "Not with signatures. With silence. With patience." For a long moment, no one moved. The air between them was heavy, like the space after a storm that hasn't decided whether it's done. Finally, Layla touched Clara's arm. "Come on," she whispered. "Let's go." Clara hesitated, glancing once more at her mother. The woman who had taught her everything about control, yet now stood as proof that some things couldn't be managed. "I'll come back," Clara said quietly. Evelyn's voice softened just enough to be almost kind. "I hope you mean that, not just say it." The door closed slowly behind her, the sound echoing like a quiet full stop. Layla helped Clara to her feet. For the first time, Clara didn't resist the help. Together they began walking toward the elevators, their reflections trailing beside them in the glass. Two women who had come in with power and left with something heavier. Consequence. As the elevator doors slid shut, Layla exhaled. "She'll forgive you," she said. Clara looked straight ahead, her voice a whisper. "Only if I learn to forgive myself first." The elevator descended, carrying them both toward whatever came next. Not victory, not escape, but the fragile beginning of understanding. The air in the corridor felt heavier now, as if the walls themselves were tired of holding everything that had been said. Clara stood frozen for a long second, her mind still replaying her mother's words, sharp, clear, and impossible to ignore. The silence stretched, filled only by the low hum of the overhead light and the faint mechanical heartbeat of the security camera above them. Finally, Clara lifted her head. Her face, once calm, flawless, professional, looked fragile in the hallway's dim glow. The strength she had carried into this building had begun to melt away, replaced by something rawer, something closer to the truth. Her voice trembled as she spoke. 9, she said quietly. "We'll come at 9. It wasn't just an agreement. It was surrender, or maybe the first step toward repair. On the other side of the door, Evelyn stood still, one hand on the lock, the other braced against the wall. Her voice, when it came, was calm but firm, like the edge of a blade softened by love. "And you'll leave now." Clara's lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. Layla, standing just behind her, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, a silent reminder that sometimes retreat isn't weakness, it's wisdom. For the first time that night, Clara didn't resist. She turned slightly toward the camera, eyes glistening. Her breath came unevenly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The words were small, almost swallowed by the hum of the light. But Evelyn heard them. She didn't move, didn't speak for a moment. When she finally answered, her voice carried through the door like a prayer made of steel. "I heard you." There was no triumph in her tone, no victory. Just acknowledgement, a quiet kind that means everything when it comes from a mother who has run out of anger, but not love. Clara closed her eyes. The hallway felt colder now. Layla squeezed her shoulder once more, then slowly guided her toward the elevator. Their footsteps echoed softly, 2 sets of heels clicking against marble, one steady, one hesitant. Halfway down the hall, Clara looked back over her shoulder. The door was still closed, but she could almost feel her mother's presence on the other side. Strong, silent, waiting. The red light above the camera blinked once, as if sealing the moment into memory. When they reached the elevator, Clara pressed the call button. The metallic doors slid open with a chime that sounded too gentle for such a long night. Layla glanced at her. "She meant it, you know," she said quietly. "I know," Clara replied. Her voice was distant but steady. "So did I." They stepped inside. The doors began to close, reflecting their faces. 2 women who looked like they'd aged years in a single hour. Layla's hand brushed against Clara's, offering silent comfort. As the elevator descended, the city lights flickered across the mirrored surface. For a moment, Clara saw herself as her mother must have seen her. Proud, capable, but lost somewhere between ambition and regret. When the doors opened on the ground floor, she took a deep breath, the kind that shakes something loose inside. "Tomorrow," she said softly, almost to herself. Layla nodded. 9 o'clock. They walked out into the night. The cool air met them like a warning and a promise. Behind them, high above, the hallway light continued to hum, steady and patient, a small witness to a family still learning how to speak without breaking. And somewhere, behind that closed door, Evelyn sat in the quiet, staring at the same clock her daughter had promised, waiting, not for an apology this time, but for proof that words could finally turn into change. The hallway was silent now, the kind of silence that hums, thick and alive, after words have done their damage and promises have been made. The clock above the door ticked faintly, soft, patient, unbothered. Evelyn sat back in the chair she had dragged close to the door earlier, her shoulders lowering for the first time in hours. Her palms were cold. Her breath came shallow, uneven, as if her body hadn't yet realized the storm had passed. She stared at the wood of the door. It looked different now, not like a barrier, but a bruise between two worlds. On one side, her daughter, wounded and stubborn, walking away under the glow of the hallway lights. On the other, a mother who had learned that love wasn't always soft. Sometimes it was made of boundaries and tired eyes. The phone on the side table buzzed. The vibration startled her, cutting through the stillness. She turned it over and saw the name, Rachel. A message. Status? Evelyn hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the screen, as if even now words could betray her. Finally, she typed, "They came. Left. 9 is on." It took less than a minute for Rachel to reply. "Copy. Police report drafted. Your choice to file." Evelyn stared at the last line. "Your choice." The two words sat there on the glowing screen like a mirror she hadn't wanted to look into. Responsibility. Not threat. Not fear. Just choice. The thing she'd spent most of her life giving her daughter, and the thing she had always been afraid to claim for herself. She set the phone down and leaned back. For the first time all night, she noticed how heavy the room felt. Papers scattered across the table, legal drafts, foundation notes, the letter still unfolded from earlier. Each one was a piece of a life rebuilt through structure, through caution. And yet, tonight, none of that had protected her from the sound of her daughter's voice on the other side of that door. Evelyn exhaled, slow, deliberate, the kind of breath that doesn't bring peace, but makes space for it. She closed her eyes and let herself feel the exhaustion that had been waiting its turn. Outside, the city kept breathing. Cars somewhere in the distance, the faint echo of footsteps on wet pavement. Life continuing without permission. She thought of the foundation she had built that morning, its clauses, its rules, its clean intentions. It was supposed to outlive her, but right now she wondered if any legacy mattered as much as a single honest conversation that hadn't happened yet. Her eyes drifted to the letter again, the one she had promised Rachel she'd finish, the one meant for Clara. She picked it up, the paper trembling slightly in her hand. A small ink line waited at the bottom where she had stopped earlier. Unfinished, unresolved. She uncapped the pen and added one final line. It wasn't a grand ending. It wasn't even advice. Just a sentence she had earned tonight, the kind that fits inside a whisper. "I hope, when you choose again, it's not fear that helps you decide." The words bled gently into the paper. She read them once, twice, then folded the letter neatly and slipped it into an envelope. Her hand steadied as she pressed the seal shut. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Rachel, brief as always. "Rest. Tomorrow's work matters more when you've slept." Evelyn smiled faintly. Not joy, something smaller, humbler. The kind of smile that belongs to someone who has survived the hardest version of the day. She turned off the light. The room went dark except for the faint glow of the city outside her window. For a long while, she just sat there, breathing, not waiting for anything. For the first time in a long time, the stillness didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The hallway hummed with the soft drone of air conditioning, that faint, constant sound that fills the emptiness of places meant for waiting. Evelyn walked slowly, barefoot, down the hotel corridor. She carried an empty glass in her hand, though she wasn't really after water or ice. She just needed motion, something to remind her that her body could still move even when her heart refused to. The carpet under her feet was soft and silent, swallowing every trace of her steps. When she turned the corner, the hum of the ice machine broke the stillness. A man in a hotel robe stood there, waiting for his bucket to fill. He glanced at her briefly and gave a polite nod, that quiet, wordless acknowledgement exchanged between two people who have both survived something they'll never speak of. She nodded back, understanding perfectly. It was the kind of moment that didn't need language, just mutual recognition that living itself can sometimes be an act of endurance. When the machine clunked and fell silent, she filled her glass halfway and turned back toward her room. The hallway light flickered once, the sort of flicker that hotels never bother fixing because nobody stays long enough to complain. She watched it for a moment, then smiled faintly. Not everything broken needs attention, she thought. Some things just hum in the background until they fade. Back inside her room, the air felt heavier, filled with the scent of paper, ink, and the faint metallic trace of hotel coffee. The desk lamp cast a small, disciplined circle of light over her papers. The rest of the room existed only as shadow. She sat, set the glass down untouched, and reached for the envelope that had waited all day. It was already sealed once, opened again, and folded neatly beside a pen that had grown tired of its own ink. The paper inside carried words she had written through trembling, confessions, boundaries, regrets. Each line was a small act of mercy toward herself, but one space remained blank: the end. She drew a slow breath, steady but deep, as if summoning permission to write the final line. Her hand hovered over the paper for a long moment. The sound of her heartbeat filled the quiet, a soft, deliberate rhythm like a metronome keeping time for grief. Outside, through the half-open curtain, the city shimmered, indifferent, alive, and impossibly normal. Cars passed below. Someone laughed in the distance. Somewhere, a street musician played a tune for nobody in particular. Life was continuing, and for once, she didn't feel the need to chase it. Finally, she lowered her pen and wrote, "Forgiveness doesn't reopen doors. It locks them kindly." The ink spread slowly into the paper fibers, dark and certain. She looked at the sentence, so small, so final, and felt something in her chest unclench. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't about return. It was about release. It was the act of locking a door so gently that neither side felt the slam. She folded the letter again, carefully, deliberately, and slipped it back into the envelope. Then she pressed her thumb against the seal until it held firm. This time, she wouldn't open it again. Some words are meant to stay closed, like rooms that have already done their work. Evelyn leaned back in the chair and let the quiet surround her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel haunted by what she couldn't fix. The city outside kept moving, but she no longer needed to. The man in the hallway, the flickering light, the sealed letter, they were all part of the same truth. Survival is not about forgetting. It's about knowing what to carry forward and what to finally set down. She reached over, turned off the lamp, and let the room fall into darkness. The letter glowed faintly in the silver wash of moonlight. Evelyn closed her eyes. She didn't whisper goodnight. She didn't pray. She simply rested, and for the first time, rest was enough.